150 years of key tempering stage, 200 years of foundation establishment, 500 years of golden elixir, 1,000 years of spirit nucleation stage, and then gifting. Nevertheless, it was worth it to make a breakthrough on the day of the upper limit. Zhu Fan, a modern man whose soul has been transmigrated into a dying beggar, is now an outer disciple of the Celestial Throne sect, striving to become a wielding life sage. He has become hostage to the system that gave him all the qualities to be on top of the world, but instead the guy has to languish his existence in the shadows. Perhaps all of this is done so that a home cultivator can appear in this world for the first time. However, Zhu Fan knew that there was an unusual world outside that he would love to see. Still, it was dangerous because in 6 years, the guy had reached the 4th step. This was the pace of the most mediocre disciple. Nevertheless, he believed that after countless years, he would surely reach the peak. After all, the most important thing in this business is stability, and the one who survives wins. He touched the wall with his hand. At the same moment, the barrier in front of his face slid open. The boy entered a short, dark hallway. In the room on the other side, there was a huge model of the city. Zhu Fan was confident that he would soon be able to return home again, and if it succeeded, it wouldn't matter how long the wait lasted. He walked closer and put the makeshift car on the road. Looking at the tall models of skyscrapers, the guy sighed heavily and thought that so far there was no use of these dreams. Still, he was calm because he had an older brother who could take care of his parents. So now he had to take care of himself. The protagonist stepped into the courtyard of his house. His humble plot was located in the Feiyu world within the Heavenly Throne sect. Stepping outside the fence, Zhu Fan shuffled his foot, dispersing the air currents. Then he took a big leap. This time it was time for him to sign up for some classes. The disciple learned a little bit of everything to stretch his progress. All this was done so as not to accidentally make a premature breakthrough. Flying over the dense forest, the boy suddenly heard someone calling his name. It was Wang Yulong. Being at the 4th stage of key tempering, he had slain a rank 6 beast with a punch, making him immediately considered talented. Zhu Fan stopped and landed. Wang Yulong ran up to the guy and asked when he would teach him the mid-level body relief technique. The disciple claimed that if one developed this ability to the highest level, one would be able to fly even faster than with the Skyrider technique. But the protagonist told his interlocutor that if he wanted to move faster, he should train less on attacking techniques, and then he would have time to develop body relief. Wang Yulong disagreed, saying that in that case, he would be left defenseless if he met a wild beast in the forest. However, Zhu Fan replied that in such a case, one could simply not go into the forest to avoid facing dangers. Wang Yulong continued to not understand why such a talented disciple would always favor the path of cowardice. 3 months ago, a terrible situation occurred not far from here. Untamed beasts ran out of the creature control room. They were huge dogs whose entire body was engulfed in fire. That day, Wang Yulong realized that he wouldn't be able to handle everyone. Leaning on the rubble, the guy held onto his injured arm and was already ready to meet his death. The monster opened its jaws and began the final roll. But at that moment, 3 bright flames erupted in the shadows nearby. The boy had no time to realize what had happened, but in the same second, all the monsters struck by the unknown fell to the ground. Wang Yulong stared straight in front of him in horror, still unable to believe that he was still alive. Suddenly, a human voice asked him if he was okay. It was Zhu Fan. He held out his hand to the boy and asked if he could stand up. Thinking back to this situation, Wang Yulong asked his interlocutor if he could teach him his deadly techniques. Still, attack class magic spells were very difficult to master. However, Zhu Fan combined the 3 spells quite easily and released them with a single wave of his hand. Suddenly, the buddies heard 2 people on the sidelines discussing Master Zuo's lectures. They claimed that from this teacher, students could solve all their attack problems. Hearing that Mr. Zuo's ability was at an incredible level, Zhu Fan suddenly said that there was no point in attacking techniques anyway, after all, if one could defend oneself. Wang Yulong disagreed, however. The guy interrupted him and would suggest that his friend go to the relevant classes. After that, the students dispersed in different directions. Approaching the bulletin board, the protagonist began to look at the available classes on the schedule. However, in most cases, he either learned the technique or it wasn't interesting to him. But suddenly, something that Zhu Fan had never even thought of trying to do before came to Zhu Fang's eyes. It was a class called Using Healing Plants in Alchemy. The boy decided that this time he would go there. The protagonist approached the registrar's office and, after saying hello, said he wanted to sign up for a course. Explained that this program lasts 3 days and includes 10 lectures. There were only 3 places left, so the cost of the course was 50 spiritual stones. Hearing this last sentence, Zhu Fan felt very dejected. He hadn't even earned 100 stones in a year of doing the sex tasks, so he would have to give up most of his annual income. Seeing that the client hesitated, the girl explained that if one wanted to study alchemy, it was better not to even try without their course. And yet, despite the fact that the basics would be learned in the course of the program, the tutor would not reveal the individual properties of healing plants. These words once again renewed the internal contradictions in Shufang's mind. He hesitated for a long time, but then he put the crystals on the table and shouted that he was ready to pay. After the registration was over, the protagonist turned around and walked back. He still couldn't get it out of his head that he had spent 50 stones. Meanwhile, the girl twirled the crystal in her hands and laughed that they had once again easily ripped off money from naive outside students who dreamed of achieving something. Only a few people knew that going into alchemy without money was a waste of time. The sun was gradually setting over the horizon, and further events unfolded in the evening market. Walking through the barely lit neighborhoods, Zhu Fan was very nervous. Now more than ever, he hoped that his investment would pay off. Suddenly, a man shouted from behind the guy. It was Uncle Zhang. He recognized his buddy and asked if he had decided to visit little Yun. The guy waved at his acquaintance and said that he could not hide anything from him as usual. Suddenly, Uncle Zhang seriously asked when the guy was going to give the bride price. He claimed that Yun was roaring every day and asking to be released to Fang. The protagonist recalled a joking conversation with the girl. At that time, she had said that she wanted to be his wife. In turn, Zhu Fan joked that as soon as he collected the money to buy her back, they would immediately get married. However, it's been a long time since that conversation, and these people still take the joke seriously. Deciding that this conversation couldn't go any further, the protagonist waved his hand and reminded his buddy that cultivators shouldn't be among the lady for long. He wanted to ask Mr. Zhang not to talk about his coming Yun. However, the man smiled and said that he had already done so. Immediately after these words, the stomping of children's feet was heard from behind. The boy turned around and realized that he was in trouble. A girl named Yun jumped on him from behind, who shouted joyfully that her husband had finally returned. She clutched onto Shufang and shouted that she had been waiting for this for a long time. The girl's arms tightly wrapped around the boy's waist. He almost cried and asked Yun to loosen her grip. The protagonist once again tried to correct this misunderstanding, saying that he was only joking. However, the girl threateningly said that a real man does not give up his words. Yun then added that according to the traditions of their village, if the bride and groom exchange gifts as a sign of engagement, they are destined to be husband and wife until death. Immediately after saying that, she held out a bracelet to the protagonist, reminding him that it was his gift. Zhu Fan tried to explain that it was a very ordinary gift he had given to the girl to distract her. However, Yun was not going to agree to this. She hugged the guy's bodies even tighter and said that she was still his wife. Zhu Fan could barely hold back his tears at what was happening. He was already stuck here because of the stupid system, and now he had to reckon with the local strange traditions. Night was approaching as the boy headed home again. As he flew, he noticed something strange, not far from his house. Wang Yuelong stood on the ground and quickly waved his hand. He said that the guy should urgently see what he had obtained. On landing, the protagonist saw that his friend was holding one of the spiritual sheep specially bred by the sect. He asked his friend if he was sure that he was not being followed by the police, to which he replied that there was nothing to worry about, because he had paid for 1 spiritual stone. Realizing that there was nothing to worry about, Zhu Fan said that in that case, they could go in. The protagonist waved 2 fingers, and his house appeared right in front of him. Wang Yuelong stared in amazement at what had happened. The boy said that it had been a long time since he had seen semi-automatic light techniques. The student also said that Brother Su surprised him more and more every time he met him. Wang Yuelong couldn't calm down, because his friend's position in society didn't match his mastery of attack, defense, and other techniques at all. He tried to assure Xuefeng that if he hadn't shut him up, he would surely have become one of the sect leaders by now. However, the protagonist immediately ordered his interlocutor to stop and reminded him that he was going to stay quieter than water and lower than grass. The boy himself knew that he could already occupy one of the prominent positions in the sect. However, in this world, there is another principle. He who stays alive wins. So he intends to continue to lead a faded existence and not to get involved in risky stories. After passing through the gate, Fan told his friend to carry the sheep here. Wang Yuelong was surprised that they were going to roast the creature whole. It took a little more time before the victim was on the spit. Now all that was left to do was to wait for the cooking. When the sheep was ready, Wang Yuelong inhaled the smell of meat with his nose and came to a frenzied delight. The flavor and brilliance of the crispy crust was top-notch. When Wang Yuelong saw the result, he almost fainted from admiration. The food was prepared with a top-level secret technique called roast lamb. After many compliments, the student reached for his bag and began fumbling through it greedily. After a few seconds, he took out a bottle of liquid. Wang Yuelong reminded him that roast lamb without wine was like throwing away spiritual stones for nothing. The protagonist grinned, surprised that his buddy owned an all-posting pouch. He noted that one of the mentors must have liked the guy. Wang Yuelong smiled and said that this wine was worth 10 times the price of a sheep. But suddenly, Zhu Fan abruptly changed his tone and turned serious to his interlocutor. He demanded that his friend tell him what had happened, because they were unlikely to spend such sums of money on an unremarkable day. The disciple smiled and realized that he would no longer hide anything from his friend. Wang Yuelong had decided to join the combat division, and the mentor who had noticed him was from there. He said that he wouldn't be able to come here again soon, so he decided to have one last feast. He then bowed his head sadly and said that he just remembered how Shu Fan had saved his life. Pouring the wine over the rim of the glass, Wang Yuelong said that the missions of the combat branch were very dangerous. He was afraid that he would be left with only bones, or he would be wiped out, and then they would never see each other again. Grabbing the glass, the protagonist said that you can't transfer wine for such dramatic effect. After a few more minutes of discussion, the buddies sat down and tasted the lamb. After a while, only bones were left on the plate. Wang Yuelong patted his stomach and said contentedly that if he had the chance to eat food from Shu Feng, then he had not lived his life in vain. Almost immediately, the lad left the house and ran toward town, shouting that he could not be seen off and would find his own way. But suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed brightly in the sky and flew straight at Wang Yuelong. The disciple turned around and saw 2 jade spellboards in his hand. Realizing that he had been given such a useful thing, the boy glistened with happiness. He immediately bowed to his buddy, saying he would never forget it. In response, the protagonist reminded him that the one who stays alive wins. After Wang Yuelong left, Zhu Fan's face once again became sad. He hardly had any friends here. That was why it wasn't so easy for the guy to let go of the one he was most comfortable socializing with. He sincerely hoped he wouldn't lose this tomboy. After gathering his thoughts, Shu Fan went to the garden to water the flowers. Tired, the protagonist summoned the spiritual rain technique and lay down on the chaise lounge. With Wang Yuelong gone, he could once again continue his reclusive life. He had long ago bribed the assignment officer, so he would not be in danger of traveling outside the sect's territory in the coming years. Zhu Fan planned to cultivate alchemy and cultivate spiritual rice. With this, he planned to save up money and go to lectures to learn forging. After summoning streams of refreshing air thanks to the special spring wind technique, the protagonist breathed a sigh of relief. He realized that with alchemy and forging skills, he could live happily ever after. He didn't have any more plans. However, there was still another way out of this boring life. This plan was much more appealing, but practically impossible to implement. The universe he found himself in was simply vast. Even the classical texts of the Celestial Throne sect said that there were at least several realms of celestials. They are most likely to be located in the Great Heliocosm. In that case, it could be argued that Zhu Fan was currently in the Middle Heliocosm. Here, ordinary people coexisted with those who aspired to enter the realm of celestials. There were thousands of such worlds in total. Besides, in the history of the Heavenly Throne sect, there had already been mentors who had managed to enter the celestial realm for the first time. But there was one big problem in all of this. Fang would definitely not be able to do that anytime soon. It was all the fault of this half-dead system. There was no rebirth waiting for him if he died before the day of the upper limit. So now he had to live like a mouse to grass. All the while the protagonist was pondering, he was playing with a tame spirit. At some point, he got bored with the creature and used the spell bird slaying. There was a powerful explosion behind him, but he didn't even look at it. Right now, he had created a new spell out of nothing. However, it was of no use. Zhu Fan was certain that if he exposed himself, someone would definitely kill him out of jealousy. If a guy crossed someone at the foundation stage, let alone at a higher degree of development, he wouldn't even be able to defend himself. In such a state, he would have to last a few more tens or even hundreds of years. But suddenly, an incredible idea struck Zhu Fan. He was able to develop his own disciples and pass on his own spells to them. He would have people under his command for whom the teacher's protection would be the highest value. With strong disciples, Zuifan would finally be able to stop worrying about his safety. But first, he had to reach the 12th stage of key tempering. Suddenly, the system sent an emergency alert that a scanning attempt had been detected near the area, which was successfully blocked. It was one of the few pluses of the available system. When an outsider tries to find out something about the protagonist, a false image is projected in front of him. Thanks to this, the seeker doesn't notice anything unusual. After taking out the jade slabs, Zhu Fan decided to invent another spell out of boredom. He thought of 3 abilities and decided that it would be a good idea to synthesize them into a spell called Beast Summoning. The protagonist jumped high and grabbed a sparrow flying in a flock. He needed a vessel for the long-term storage of the seized soul's activity. Any bird would do the trick. Lowering himself to the ground, Zhu Fan began preparations to invent a hybrid spell. Before the final stage, he received a sparrow that resembled clay in consistency. After the bird soul back into the body, Zhu Fan used incantations to impart hardness to the new shell and changed its composition. He ended up with a bird made entirely of ceramic. The sparrow took off and circled above its creator for a while. The result looked good. It remained to be seen whether such a trick would work on a werewolf. But suddenly the bird tried to swoop down on the protagonist, and not calculating the weight, crashed on his forehead. Zhu Fan thought that this was a dead end. He decided to accept failure and thought that when alchemy started to bring in money, he would try to buy a normal vessel. In this world of spiritless stones, one can't even take a step. Meanwhile, Wang Yuelong was on a mission in the forest outside the sect's territory. He looked fearfully in front of him, unable to believe the result. Then the guy raised his head and laughed loudly. He had once again managed to defeat his opponent with just one blow. This time, Brother Zhu had given him an even cooler spell. It wasn't even clear what level this ability was. Meanwhile, not far from this place, the mentor was walking with his prey in his hand. He hoped that their newcomer would not be eaten by any beast, or else all responsibility would fall back on him. Reaching the meeting place, the former fighter could not believe his eyes. In front of him, a dead lynx lay on the ground with a long, glowing rod sticking out of its forehead. The newcomer stood beside it with a nonchalant look. The old hunter dropped his prey in surprise. He asked in bewilderment, wondering if the boy had finished him off with one move. He wondered if the boy had killed him with one move. This is what the rank system looked like in this organization. A combat unit divides fighters into 4 ranks, A, B, C, D. The lowest ranked fighters are not fit for anything. C rank holders are treated as cannon fodder. Category B soldiers are the main fighting force, and only A rank holders are the elite of the entire organization. Mentors are personally involved in their development. These people are given the best of everything. Wang Yuelong stared at his mentor intently and then asked what was wrong with his face. The former fighter said that he was fine, but still a little shocked. It was surprising that a rookie was able to straighten out a beast at the 6th stage of key tempering. Normally, such qualities were of rank B and above, but even to obtain the best category, one had to prove themselves some more. To do so, one had to kill 10 beasts at the 7th key tempering stage. The mentor assured the newcomer that he would have more than one more chance to prove himself. However, the boy's face showed that he was disappointed. The mentor then said that he hoped Wang Yuelong wouldn't forget about him when he became a rank A fighter. The disciple thanked the attendant for recommending him and said that his memory was fine. After a while, Wang Yuelong finally saw Shuifan. The protagonist asked what was so strange about killing a 6th step beast with a single blow. He gave his friend the Fire Peak spell. The peculiarity of this skill is that it slows down your heartbeat just before you throw it. This was what helped it hit the target accurately. Therefore, it would be strange if Wang Yuelong didn't kill the opponent with a single strike. The apprentice admired his friend's insight and again suggested that he join the combat squad. He explained that with Fang's skills, he would be immediately assigned to a rank A squad. He would become a favorite of his mentors, and that was a direct path to greatness. But the protagonist once again refused, adding this time that he does not like to kill. In addition, the risks of dying himself would be greatly increased. And even the high rank did not cancel the fact that the position of fighters in society is lower than that of masters, alchemy, and forging. Zhu Fan thought that if he were to reach the peak of the key tempering stage, he would not be able to break through to the next stage until the designated time. At best, he would be considered a hopeful person, until at some point he would be despised for staying in the same place for so long. Wang Yulong asked, wasn't the ability to instill terror in the hearts of others a dream for any man? He was confident that Brother Zhu, with his talents, would eventually be able to ascend to the celestial realm and become the 39th honorable ancestor of the Heavenly Throne sect. That being said, it was clear that Wang Yuelong also wanted to ascend there as a disciple. According to the rules of this world, if an almighty cultivator could endure the heavenly test, he would be allowed to take 2 disciples with him. The protagonist looked at his interlocutor in bewilderment and asked why he wanted to go to the realm of the Celestials. He was sure that life there was much worse than here. Wang Yuelong objected, saying that getting to the realm of the Celestials was the dream of any cultivator. Shu Fan looked at his interlocutor indifferently and said that it was only a goal for him. The guy prepared to use the ability and thought that he probably wouldn't want to live in the higher realm and die of boredom either. In the next second, he cut the meat carcass in half with one easy movement, which once again surprised his friend very much. Shu Fan told Wang Yuelong to eat more meat, because it was very beneficial for the 6th stage of tempering. Suddenly, the boy asked his strong friend if he wanted to take him on as an apprentice. However, the protagonist was not impressed by this prospect. He asked his interlocutor whether he had gone completely crazy and animal fat had clogged his brains. Swallowing another piece of meat, Wang Yuelong said that he came from a lineage of small-grade cultivators. Right now, one member of their family was at the golden elixir stage. However, he then added that one of his ancestors had even reached the spirit birth stage. The protagonist asked in bewilderment what all these stories were about. The guy replied that their clan was now in decline, but thanks to the travel notes left behind by those ancestors, the family members traditionally had a broad outlook. Feiyu belonged to the middle Chiliocosm, and the realm of the Celestials belonged to the Great Realm. Suddenly, Wang Yuelong's face darkened, and he admitted that his friend was right, and the realm of the Celestials was indeed a cruel place. Their sect territory is located in one of the poorest regions of the world, and the central continent is considered the promised land for every cultivator. That is where hundreds of the strongest sects are located with disciples at the spirit birth stage and above. However, as was usually the case, even among the strongest, there were the best. The Heavenly Arrow sect is one of them. It is said to be the strongest organization in the world. Fan pretended to lazily sip his wine, but this information surprised him. He really didn't expect that his friend could have such serious knowledge in this area. Wang Yuelong added that the cultivators of the central continent had studied all the techniques and spells to their essence, and were now in the business of combining old techniques and creating new ones. Such people are called spellcasters. In terms of their status in society, they stand far above any masters. Wang Yuelong added that his ancestor had personally visited the Heavenly Arrow sect's guests. Therefore, based on his records, it could be said that Brother Shu had all the data to become a spellcaster. Wang Yuelong fell to his knees once again and started begging for his friend to take him on as a disciple. The guy claimed that there was surely no one in their sect capable of creating attack spells that could strike a beast 2 steps higher. Suddenly, a blue light flashed in the protagonist's hand. He lifted his interlocutor into the air with a light wind. However, Wang Yuelong was not frightened, and on the contrary, he was even more delighted. Fan said to his friend not to even dream of becoming his disciple. The guy is already over 18 and his time has passed for that. But in fact, an interesting thought did creep into the main character's mind. What if he really did become a spellcaster? Surely his talent would be enough for that. Seeing 2 fingers pointed straight at his forehead, Wang Yuelong was truly frightened for the first time. For a moment, he thought that his buddy had decided to kill him as an unnecessary witness. After that, The hand slowly reached up to touch the guy's forehead. Wang Yuelong cried and shouted that he promised to keep his friend's potential a secret, and then asked him not to kill him. Fortunately, his friend said that he would not kill anyone because he did not want to make a fuss about the unknown disappearance of a cult disciple. All this problem can be solved legally. Zhu Fan took his fingers away from his buddy's head, and then the memory editing ability was applied to his brain. The boy's gaze immediately faded, and he asked his friend where he stood. The protagonist replied that Wang Yuelong was talking about how he wanted to become a rank A fighter. The disciple said that was exactly what he meant, and then asked his interlocutor to teach him a few more interesting techniques. Fan smiled and said that he would be happy to help his friend. A little more time passed, and the buddies fell asleep outside, having had enough meat and drunk wine. The next day, Fan rushed to write down everything he remembered. This world was much more complicated than he had imagined. It turned out that his sect wasn't even close to being among the strongest. In addition, he had also learned about the spellcasters, although it was logical that skills couldn't appear on their own, and someone created them. The only thing that remained unclear was how far the central continent was from its current location, and what dangers could be encountered on the way there. But more than anything else, the boy wondered about something else. He couldn't figure out if he needed all of this. For now, Fong didn't see the point of going there. After thinking about it, he decided to take a day off and not train. Lying on the bench and chewing on a blade of grass, Fong frustratingly thought that if he had a computer with internet access here, being a lifelong sage wouldn't be so boring. In all this time, which seemed to last endlessly, he was already tired of clearing his mind and taming his desires. Suddenly, the boy heard an incredible rumble in the sky. When he looked out from under the canopy, he saw a ship of incredible size flying over his plot. It was a sailing vessel about 500 meters long. It was escorted on all sides by about 100 sentries at the Golden Elixir stage. Each of them flew on their own Firebird. In addition, there were smaller ships on the sides, about 300 meters each. The expedition was of an incredible scale, so it was logical to assume that they were heading for resource extraction. Xue Fan smiled and thought that when he learned forging, he would have his own ship. Suddenly, the system alerted about an intruder in the territory. The protagonist snapped his fingers, hoping that it was Wang Yuelong who had come again. His settlement returned to a state of visibility, and nearby, Fong actually saw his friend. He asked the guy what he was doing here, and shouldn't he be on a mission. However, Wang Yuelong did not answer the questions. He only limped and walked into the property. Only then did the protagonist notice that his leg was bloody. The newly minted fighter replied that he was injured while on a mission, so he had to take a few days off to recover, and he only came here because he wants to spend all this time with his friend. Fan angrily said as he gave Wang Yuelong the body relief spell. However, the protagonist quickly realized that his buddy had once again decided to go rogue. The boy scratched the back of his head and bashfully said that that beast had a strong defense, and only with strong spells could it be broken through. So he decided to go head-on again. Fang looked sternly at his talentless arc and said that his skills were irredeemably lousy. He once again began to teach his interlocutor that when fighting a stronger opponent, one should step back, take a stance, and use a long-range spell. Fang then asked if the guy had also forgotten about defense techniques. Wang Yuelong replied that in the heat of battle, he decided not to use them. He then affectionately asked his friend what to do with a beast that had strong defense and fast speed. The protagonist seriously replied that the boy should not seek answers to this question from a person who is a homebody and does not go out. After that, a tense silence hung in the air. Fan realized that it was impossible to get his martial prowess into someone's head. Wang Yuelong wanted his friend to stop pretending and finally realized that no mentor would teach him the same thing. The guy said that Brother Shu should stop pretending to know nothing. It was clear to Wang Yuelong that the protagonist was hiding his talents from others for some reason. But he knew what his friend was capable of. At some point, Fang gave up and said that he would tell him how to deal with such beasts. But in return, Wang Yuelong had to tell him all about the flying ships that had recently passed by. The boy said that he liked this exchange. The protagonist rose from his seat and muttered that in that case they had better start with his part of the agreement. He immediately swiftly swung his hand, and both boys were transported into empty subspace. Wang Yuelong stared at the strange illusion in a daze, unable to believe that this was only possible using a charm technique. Surely creating such a subspace would require the spiritual energy of all the disciples of the sect. Zhu Fan said that a friend would do a training battle right now. He also added that his spiritual energy would not be enough to maintain the illusion for a long time, so one should start now. Trailing off, Fan snapped his fingers, adding that Wang Yuelong would now face a fast beast with good defense. A second later, a stone mantis that had a 7th stage key tempering appeared in front of the newly minted warrior. The monster immediately pounced on his opponent, and the protagonist shouted that his friend had 15 minutes, after which they would analyze the flaws in his tactics. The boy fearfully dodged the first blow, complaining that he hadn't even been warned about the start of the fight. He immediately decided to counterattack using the feather lightness and fire peak skills. However, the mantis dodged the daggers flying at it without any difficulty. Such speed amazed the disciple. He didn't expect this monster to be so fast. That's when the protagonist said that the friend moves at a good speed, but releases the spades very slowly. The very next second after that, the mantis was right behind the fighter's back. Fong sighed and said that this was kindergarten level. The monster grabbed the man with its claws and tossed him far aside. The guy struggled to get to his feet, shaking his whole body. The protagonist asked his friend what he was constantly distracted by. However, Wang Yuelong did not answer, and the fight continued. After 15 minutes, there were more cuts on the student's body. He looked down at his feet, not knowing what to say about it. Shu Fan said that Wang Yuelong had lost the bout with almost no chance. The boy completely lacked the ability to observe his opponent, notice his habits, and predict his movements. Abruptly putting 2 fingers to his friend's head, Fang said that every creature has its own habits, regardless of whether it was a human or a monster. That's why you need to understand one simple truth during combat. To defeat a fast beast, you must use a spell that seals its movements. You can only do this if you understand how your opponent is moving. If the fighter is at least a little attentive, he will understand exactly where to hit. Only if the boy could analyze the enemy's actions, the mantis wouldn't have been able to dodge those peaks. After the miss, Wang Yuelong's movements became jittery and frantic. Already at this moment, he had already lost. During the fight, the beast managed to dodge 4 attacks, but even that wasn't enough for the boy to understand the enemy's movements. Meanwhile, Wang Yuelong marveled that his friend's illusion skill was so excellent that he could still feel the pain from the blows he had received in the fight with the mantis. He could not understand how Fang managed to hold the illusion and watch the fight at the same time. The guy rushed to his interlocutor and said that he realized that it wasn't all of his faults. However, the protagonist said that they were, but for now, they needed to focus on fixing what had already been pointed out. At the end, he added that if he had time in the future, he was willing to teach his friend something else. Zuifan smiled and thought that he had wanted to say this phrase at the right moment for a long time. After that, the protagonist made himself comfortable on the bench. He reminded him that it was now Wang Yuelong's turn to fulfill his part of the bargain and tell him about those flying ships. The student suggested moving to a more relaxing place. Then both boys sat down on the chaise lounges. After that, Wang Yuelong said that it was worth listening more carefully because the history of this ship was very ancient. 500 years ago, the Supreme Preceptor gathered all of the sect's possessions and traveled to the central continent to order the construction of a ship. For the sake of this moment, their organization had not accepted any new members for 50 years because it was struggling to feed itself. Some members of the sect went mad at the sight of the spiritual stones. The life of the organization began to get better only after the built ship arrived at the site. From that moment on, the sect was considered a serious force. The protagonist asked if the organization had been preparing for war all this time. Wang Yuelong replied that it was all for the sake of resources. Half of the area of this world is covered by the so-called Great Sea. It is believed that the amount of resources there is as vast as the sea itself. In addition, it is believed that there are valuable treasures hidden in the depths, which in principle are not found on land. But at the same time, the Great Sea is extremely dangerous. It cannot be explored with only sturdy warriors. Therefore, a flying ship is needed to be able to search for resources. This is due to the fact that from the depths sometimes rise monsters of incredible size. Only by having a flying ship, there is a chance to fend off their attacks. If the civilization relied only on the resources available on land, the development of most students would end at the stage of the golden elixir. In addition, some enthusiasts say that on a flying ship, you can not only sail through the sea or air, but even go beyond the celestial horizon. Shufan looked closely at the sun and thought that his interlocutor was talking about space. The boy said that rumor has it that only the highest level sects do this sort of thing. Their organization is content to travel the great sea. The protagonist nodded his head meaningfully. The thought immediately came to him that possessing such a ship in this world was akin to possessing a nuclear weapon. It was these mysterious devices that determined the sect's position in the world and were the powerhouses of the sect. Suddenly, Shufan asked his friend if there was any option to get on the ship and inspect it. Wang Yulong confirmed this, but then added that only 4 types of people are allowed on board. First and foremost, they are experts in research spells. They determine the ship's route. Then, there are the guards of the combat section. As a rule, they are fighters of rank A. Following them are masters of alchemy and forging. During the expedition, they are responsible for the primary processing of the extracted raw materials. The last type is the commander of a ship in the Void Mastery stage, who is well versed in all areas of martial and scientific arts. Therefore, from Wang Yuelong's words, it is not difficult for Fang to enter the ship. All he needs to do is to become a rank A fighter after reaching the Golden Elixir stage and get into the guard squad. It would be much harder to get into other positions, unless one became an alchemy or forging master of the 3rd grade or higher. The protagonist sighed heavily. For the Golden Elixir stage, he would have to live for another few hundred years without dying. And it took an incredible amount of money to become a master of alchemy or forging. At this moment, Wang Yuelong once again asked Brother Shu to go with him to the battle station. The protagonist said he wasn't interested, and added that he wanted to learn how to build his own ship. Wang Yuelong was surprised that his friend had decided to take a swing at such purchases. He reminded him that even if he sold all the rice he had grown, he wouldn't be able to pay for his introductory forging course. Shufan said that in that case, he would have to stop feeding his buddy. The very next day, the protagonist came to the alchemy study halls. He thought for the first time that if he had studied as much in his previous life, his parents would have died of happiness. Fan looked resolutely at the front door. All he had wanted for the past few years was to find a way to go back. As he got closer, the guy said hello to the girl and introduced himself. Then the main character said that he wanted to enroll in a course called Pill-Making Techniques. The receptionist replied that this program costs 500 spirit stones and 100 merit points. At the same time, the cost of the 2nd year is paid in the same way. The student will have 2 days off per month. Upon graduation, there is an opportunity to join the alchemy department. Zhu Fan gave the 1st year's fee with a pain in his heart. Judging from the rates, it was a brazen and shameless robbery. After accepting the payment, the girl asked the newcomer to follow her. After passing through the main gate, Fan admiringly looked around the large open space. Now he could see where all the money paid by the trainees was going. Looking at all of this, the girl realized that people like him never even made it out of their village. She sincerely didn't understand why people like that would go into alchemy. After that, the girl disdainfully handed the newcomer a token and not sincerely wished him to become a master. However, Fan decided to ignore this attitude and thanked the receptionist. A large number of people turned out in the classrooms. Suddenly, the guy smelled a pleasant aroma coming from somewhere in the depths of the room. At the same moment, a beautiful girl approached him. She said hello and asked him if this was the first lesson for the boy. At the sight of her, Fang instantly blushed. He had heard legends about this girl. The protagonist gathered himself and introduced himself, asking for the name of his interlocutor. The girl carefully fixed her hair and said that her name was Sha Yan. She also explained that she only teaches here when her father can't show up for class. Fan mumbled something inaudible, and Yan asked him if something had happened. The guy scratched the back of his head in embarrassment and said it was fine. It was just that now he was wondering how he could catch up with those who had been practicing for a long time. Shayan laughed and said that her students had already managed to learn some basics. She then took out a jade tablet with the past materials and offered the new student a one-on-one study session after lunch. After that, the girl said that it was already time to start the lesson. She smiled and asked the boy to listen to her especially attentively. After Sha Yan left, Zhu Fan grabbed his heart. He thought that the plot was developing at a risky pace. In addition, the main character thought that he had seen a movie somewhere that started the same way. Evening came, and the boy went to the place where they had agreed to meet his teacher. The girl sat down in front of him and asked if he was ready to start practicing. However, the protagonist kept his eyes on her, not understanding how one could concentrate on alchemy in such a situation. One single look from her killed any desire to learn in him. Shachin smiled and said that they would go through the methods of the initial processing of the spirit plants, as it was a very important part of knowledge in alchemy. It was what would determine the quality of the pills created. Zhu Fan stared at her like a mesmerized man and listened to every word. This was how he had embarked on the path of learning alchemy. Besides, with such a teacher, learning would not be boring. A month had already passed since that very first day. As it turned out, alchemy is a very tricky business. It was only now that the protagonists began to make their first test potions. Putting the ingredients into the vat, he used fire control and energy control to heat up the fire. After the bowl got hotter, Fan piled the remaining ingredients into it and closed the lid. After a while, he looked inside to see what was going on. Beautiful blue and green bubbles were rising up from the bowl. Slamming the lid shut, he thought, this is an easy one after all. But in the next second, the vat exploded, showering the protagonist's face with fumes. As an excuse, Zhu Fan thought that even geniuses sometimes had their cauldrons explode. Immediately, the guy looked fearfully at the bowl that was worth a lot of money. At that moment, he wished more than anything that such an incident would not happen again. Zhu Fan carefully inspected the cauldron from different sides for damage. However, all the walls were in normal condition. On one of the bevels, he did find a large crack. The protagonist immediately remembered what he had been told about it. This type of bowl could withstand a maximum of 10 explosions, so it had to be used with care. He also knew that it took about 20 cauldrons to make the first pill, 50 to develop his own, 100 to become an alchemist, and 1,000 to become a mentor. It is not without reason that they say it is not for the poor. But immediately, Zhu Fan thought that geniuses like him shouldn't be subject to such rules. He unrestrainedly began experimenting with various substances. However, the situation only worsened. A couple minutes later, the boiler exploded for the third time. Thus, there were about 7 attempts left before a new purchase. This time, however, he finally got something. After a few experiments, the protagonist figured out how to work with it. If the next batch was also successful, after deducting the costs, it would bring him 17.5 spirit stones, which was about 600% profit. This was an order of magnitude more profitable than completing sect assignments. This was how he realized that he was on the right path. Zhu Fan clenched his fists and decided that if he was going to do this, he should keep working. The next day, the protagonist came to the study halls. A professor named Sha Jintian, who was a core course instructor, recalled that yesterday he had assigned students to prepare a nutritional pill. He then asked who had done well in this task. As it turned out, no one was able to do it. The professor laughed and said that it was obvious from the faces of the newcomers that they had blown up more than one cauldron and had not prepared the pills. Still, he calmed the students and said that everything has its time. The newbies immediately started talking about how they almost killed themselves yesterday, and someone even blew up 2 whole woks. However, of all the listeners, it was Fan who caught the professor's attention. The boy became nervous, not understanding why Sha Jintian was staring at him so intently. Suddenly, the professor formed a noise screen and asked his daughter if she knew the student named Shufan well. Yan replied that he was the most ordinary-looking student who kept himself modest and didn't stand out in any way. Sha Jintian explained that this young man was not as simple as he wanted to appear. He asked his daughter to pay more attention to this student from now on. Upon entering the classroom, the professor immediately sensed that this boy had the scent of a ready-made pill coming from him. The girl asked what it was for. Covering up his true thoughts, the professor said that he thought this student had great potential. Sha Jintian also added that if his suspicions were confirmed, he would take the young man for personal study. Later that day, Zhu Fan was experimenting with pills at home. His cauldron still had 6 explosions to endure, so he had to try not to ruin it until he had money for a new one. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, the protagonist saw a house appear out of nowhere on a mountain not far from him. He went outside and looked around. It wasn't clear why anyone would move to such a remote area and settle on a mountain. Suddenly, the guy saw something approaching him at high speed from the side of the house. When the object was right next to his face, Zhu Fan couldn't believe his eyes. It was Wei Yun who had ended up here for some unknown reason. She flew into the protagonist at high speed, knocking out all of his organs. Zhu Fan lifted the girl up with trembling hands and asked what she was doing here. Yun added that she just wanted to check on her husband and added that she had already reached the 4th stage of key tempering. To demonstrate this, she jumped up again and smoothly flew into the air. Zhu Fan looked at it skeptically, not understanding whether she was showing off her cultivation or flaunting her skirt. Yun hugged the guy again, saying that the mentor had come upon a rare spirituality in her. He wanted to take her on as an apprentice, but she refused. The protagonist laughed and praised her. Suddenly, the girl said that she had flown here at the request of her father, who was still continuing to ransom her. Zhu Fan frowned and said that it was good news. The guy said it was late and Yun probably hadn't eaten in a while. He said he could cook something and the girl agreed. After that, the protagonist started making different dishes in hopes that Yun would get full and leave. Some time passed and the table was filled with various delicious food. But the main place was occupied by a large plate of spiritual rice. In the process, Zhu Fan said that he had wanted to talk about the topic of marriage jokes for a long time. He explained to the girl that she was like a little sister to him. The main character said that choosing a fiancé is the most important decision in any girl's life. However, he is hardly suitable for this role. After saying those words, Yun paused for a few seconds before bringing her wand to her mouth. Suddenly, her hands trembled. Immediately afterward, tears began to drip from her eyes into the rice bowl. Yun started crying and screaming that her husband didn't need her anymore. Such an effective mixture of female and child manipulation Zhu Fan had not expected at all. After that, long hours of trying to calm the girl down dragged on. The protagonist was still trying to bring the girl to her senses and talk to her like an adult. However, she only screamed that her husband was leaving her. On the 3rd hour of futile persuasion, the guy yelled out that no one was going to give up on her. Yun finally calmed down a bit. Sobbing, she asked if Zhu Fan was really still her husband. The protagonist again tried to clarify this point, but the child did not let him say a word and burst into tears again. Tired of this endless shouting, Zhu Fan said that he would pay this ransom. Hearing this, Yun instantly calmed down and abruptly reached for her wands. She immediately continued eating as if nothing had happened, saying she would remember those words, and adding that the food had already gotten a little cold. The boy stared indignantly at the cunning child and asked who had taught her such manipulation. Yun said that she did not know what it was about. After saying this, Zhu Fan started screaming and tearing his hair. The girl embarrassedly mouthed that she really wanted them to be husband and wife. She then looked meaningfully at the protagonist, waiting for his reaction. Zhu Fan realized that this was another manipulation. However, this time he simply decided to accept it and sighed heavily. He immediately stroked Yun's head, deciding to let things be as they were. Several days passed like this. Yun continued to live with him. From time to time, the girl also cooked something on her own. She was very fond of treating her fiancé. However, the latter still continued to treat it as a formality. Suddenly, there was a bright blue flash on the horizon. In a second, a huge blue bird appeared right above the main character's house. A beautiful girl in a gray dress sat on it. The protagonist looked greedily at the visitor, hoping she had arrived just for him. In the same second, her gaze fell on Zhu Fan, and he finally understood everything. Zhu Fan thought that the system had finally decided to give him a gift, out of pity for him. A beautiful female mentor at home would never be out of place. Suddenly, another voice greeted the Honorable and asked what she needed in these lands. The mentor explained that she wanted to take someone with her. The voice asked if her target was in the Heavenly Throne sex territory, and the girl confirmed it. The next second, a huge blue flower rose up at Yun, who nonchalantly continued to chew on the watermelon. The mentor asked if the girl wanted to become her mentee. Suddenly, a voice asked if the Venerable had come here to take their man from these lands. It was the sex border guardian. He claimed that although the girl was a heavenly spirit bearer, she was not worth the attention of other organizations. But suddenly, the woman looked angrily at the guard and said that their fates were linked, and she would take this child anyway. After that, the mentor turned to Yun, saying that she was willing to accept the girl as her personal disciple. The woman explained that she was skilled in training methods for the development of celestial spirit bearers and would take her subordinate all the way to the celestial realm. The child honestly said that she didn't even know if she wanted it or not. Hearing this, Zhu Fan was furious because the girl was missing an opportunity that might not come again. Suddenly, Yun turned to the protagonist and asked him how she should proceed. The guy was immediately stared at with suspicious looks. At the same moment, everyone present started using the divine consciousness ability to check him. It was a serious technique they could use to reveal his intentions. At the same time, there was a pleasant odor coming from the mentor, and the guard was trying to do something incomprehensible. In the end, Zhu Fan gathered his thoughts and exhaled heavily. He turned to Yun and said that this was a great chance that was surely worth taking. Under this kind of observation, he couldn't say anything else. On the other hand, it was a great chance to quietly dump his little wife. Lastly, the girl asked if she could visit her husband. She confirmed this and said that her methods did not involve taking a vow of celibacy and that she was not in the habit of prying into her students' private lives. In addition, she claimed that if a heavenly spirit bearer chose someone, then that person was also special. Yun said that in that case, she would do as her husband told her to do. The guard said he accepted the decision and congratulated them. The woman then put the girl on the bird with a slight wave of her hand and said she was taking her right away. The huge creature and the guard immediately scattered in different directions. Zuefan exhaled, happy that he was finally alone. There were a large number of pumped-up masters in this world. The protagonist noticed that he was constantly getting visitors who were stronger than him. After lying on the ground for a while, he decided that although he was stuck at the key tempering stage, it was no reason to lie around. For example, it was possible to pump the techniques of the 5 elements. The book of the same name was on trend, which meant that the guy had bought it for a reason, but suddenly the system alerted again about the trespasser of the site. A tall, pumped-up man with swarthy skin entered the property. Shu Fan was startled, but he soon recognized this man as Wang Yuelong. He asked his friend if he had spent a month in the primeval forest. The apprentice grinned and explained that he had gone hunting in a very distant forest, where he only killed beasts of a level higher than himself. In the end, he managed to finish off as many as 8 of them. According to the sex assignment, he still had 2 more specific beasts to kill, but this task was too difficult for him. The protagonist realized that his friend had been through quite a lot in the past month. Wang Yulong said that every day he was on the verge of life and death. The 2 friends lay down on the chaise lounges again. The young fighter wanted to ask his friend for advice on how to finish off the remaining 2 beasts. When asked if he had met them, the lad replied that he had already managed to enter the fray, but had almost died there. The protagonist said he wanted a full description of these beasts. With a yawn, Wang Yulong narrated that the first was an earthbender. This monster had an unusual defense technique. When it realized that danger was approaching, it would immediately burrow underground. If one didn't finish off this creature within a couple of moments, there would be no more chances. The second was a blood cat. This monster was so fast that its habits were impossible to see. From the first throw, it almost gave Wang Yuelong a fatal wound. The guy asked his friend how he would do if he were in his shoes. Xu Fan got angry at his interlocutor because instead of progress, he just comes to nag for an answer. And then the protagonist decided to teach the careless fighter a lesson. He said that he has a technique that allows him to kill any creature with a single blow. Moreover, this skill was quite simple and consisted of just one move. Wang Yulong's eyes lit up, and he asked to urgently teach it to him. Xu Fan narrated that this technique was invented by a great thinker and master, and he only obtained it by luck. He then said he was readily available to show how it worked. The protagonist transported the 2 guys into subspace. He explained that he would now create 2 mantises containing the qualities described by Wang Yuelong. A second later, one of the monsters attacked Fang from the rear. However, he didn't even turn around and said that he would demonstrate how to use this technique to kill without looking. Before Wang Yuelong knew it, the protagonist swung his hand sharply and made a huge hole in the mantis's chest. While the young martial artist was stunned at what had happened, Zuefan said that no defense would save him from this ability. Wang Yulong's facial expression did not have time to change, but at the same instant, another mantis ran up to him from behind. At a great speed, it brought its claws to the guy's neck, preparing to cut it. However, the young fighter didn't even have time to realize anything before a green slurry suddenly poured down on him. When he looked back, he saw Xu Fan standing in front of him. The protagonist quickly covered the distance and destroyed the second praying mantis with a single blow. Waving his head toward his defeated foe, he said he only needed a couple moments to straighten out his target. Wang Yuelong started begging his friend to share this technique with him. Fan said that he would love to help, but it takes a lot of time and battles to learn this skill well. Expectedly, the guy asked if there was another way to learn it faster. The protagonist coughed and said that the ancient sage who invented the technique had indeed spoken of there being such a way. Making a serious face and struggling to contain his laughter, Fan mouthed the need to shave his head. He explained that that master had claimed that the day after, it would be easier for the disciple to apply the skill. This all sounded very strange, and Wang Yulong expectedly started to hesitate. However, the protagonist said that he wasn't going to insist. He was going to give the skill to his friend. This ability allowed you to hit the enemy's weakest point precisely, ahead of them by several moments. However, it was logical that such knowledge could not be free. After a while, Wang Yulong abruptly jumped to his feet and shouted through his tears that he agreed. The protagonist paused for a moment, making the young fighter tense. He was only laughing at the fact that he was about to see something amazing. For a few minutes, Wang Yulong's head was completely clear of hair. The smooth, light bald spot shone brightly in the sun. Barely containing his laughter, the protagonist told his friend that he was finally one step closer to becoming stronger. But judging by the boy's face, he wasn't very happy about it. Suddenly, he asked why Brother Zhu was so strong, yet his hair was still in place. Fang hesitated, however, then said that he simply did not seek to become even stronger. To avoid even more unnecessary questions, the protagonist sent his friend home to practice and refine his technique. Walking out of the house, Wang Yulong thought for a moment that this was really how it should be. Zhu Fan didn't think that his buddy would fall for it so easily. However, there was no time for jokes now. Thanks to Alchemy, the protagonist planned to accumulate enough money to learn forging. 3 whole months had already passed since that day. Further events took place somewhere far away in some sacred place. Mary Yun saddled the bird and ordered it to fly forward. However, the creature immediately stopped when it heard the voice of its mistress. She asked her apprentice if she was already tempted to fly away. At this point, the girl had still not mastered the Heaven's Mandate techniques, and her skills still left much to be desired. The woman explained that she was not going to let Yun go at this stage. In addition, she had also ended up here as a heavenly spirit bearer back in the day. Still, in spite of all the strictness, the mentor realized that looking back over her years, she must be pleased with her students' progress. Their training would have been at a much more measured pace if it weren't for that scary dream. It had been a long time, and the warrior still couldn't forget it. She was sure that it was a warning from a heavenly spirit, a warning of impending danger. Stroking her disciple's head, the woman thought that she was really asking too much of her. However, Yun was the one who could stop the coming disaster. But the girl said she wanted to take a little walk, for the training had taken all her strength away. It would be even more wonderful if she could see her husband. The mentor was sure that the heavenly spirit would not allow the chosen girl to choose the most ordinary man. And if she was so attached to him, it meant that he had a great future ahead of him. The woman allowed a walk, but she had to refrain from traveling to her husband's house for the time being. She promised that when the student had mastered the techniques of the celestial mandate to an intermediate level, they could talk about a date. Parallel events were developing in the forging training rooms. Upon entering the classroom, the protagonist was literally blinded by the bright glow emanating from the classroom. Looking around, he found that almost all of the students had shaved heads. It was also there that Shu Fan caught one of the guys talking to his buddies. The disciple said that he had been told about this method by a friend from the martial arts department. From the description of this person, the protagonist realized that he was talking about Wang Yulong. He'd seen people like this in the alchemy halls before, and now the fashion had reached forging classes. Amazingly, this dumbass had managed to get almost all the students of the Outer Lands hooked on this cheap prank. Indeed, after a short time, most of the disciples of the Heavenly Throne sect shaved their heads. This phenomenon went down in the history of the organization as bald madness. Meanwhile, Shu Fan was diligently familiarizing himself with a beginner's self-tutorial on the basics of forging. Unexpectedly, it turned out that the threshold of entry into this art was much higher than that of alchemy. The protagonist spent 10,000 spiritual stones, and in the end, he had to study everything himself. While returning home, Shu Fan suddenly saw a man named Pang Fu. The boy asked the acquaintance what he was doing in his neighborhood. A sect disciple, who only needed to know that his parents were very rich, immediately recognized Brother Shui. The guy explained that he had heard rumors about the main character's success in alchemy. Fu decided to congratulate his friend on this and give him some spirit stones. However, Fang tried to refuse, saying that he didn't have to gift anything. However, the fatty stood his ground, saying that outer disciples were still like lonely wanderers with no one to take care of them, so there was no need to refuse the rare gifts of fate. The protagonist studied with this boy until he reached the key tempering stage. With his sudden appearance, Fu reminded him that there weren't many people in this world that he could call buddies. However, the question remained as to why the boy had decided to be so generous. After asking what actually happened, the sect disciple decided to get straight to the point. Fu said that the fact is that the outer disciples have nothing to rely on in the sect because no one cares about them. Therefore, their destiny is to get pennies for doing the tasks of the organization. That's why the fat man wanted the outer disciples to unite. Pan Fu explained that they could share resources and information with each other and solve complex problems together. He argued that the emergence of such an association would make their lives much easier. The protagonist grinned, ironically saying that the fat man among them had the hardest life. Very easy to say to someone who comes from a rich merchant family that is cooler than any of the great warrior houses. Fu was surprised and asked how the guy knew about it. In reality, the protagonist once received a handout from a fat man. That's when he noticed the characteristic family ring on his index finger. Nevertheless, Xufan replied that he had caught a glimpse of the entourage that Fu came with when he joined the sect. He then asked if the interlocutor wanted to form a semblance of an alliance. Noticing that his colleague was living quite well since he had spiritual tea, the fat man said that he wanted to gather 1,000 outer disciples at the same stage who could help each other. The protagonist said that he was interested, however, he wanted to know his benefit. Fu explained that, first of all, the guy would get first-hand news of the sect. Secondly, he will gain useful connections. Among the outer disciples, there are many who would like to try their hand at alchemy, but they don't have the money to study, so they've been serving masters for years. Since the fame of Xufang's success has been around for a long time, he would be able to help the more backward disciples develop. In addition, they already had 40 candidates to join the battle squad, 2 promising alchemists and 1 apprentice forging master. Fu assured that they only needed to persuade Xu Fang to start blossoming. Realizing that this conversation would not just end, the protagonist agreed to help. The fat man smiled and said that he didn't expect any other answer. He then placed a blue ball in front of his interlocutor. Fan asked what it was, to which Fu replied that it was some sort of communication device. They were made by the same apprentice of the forging master. With this ball, the protagonist will receive the latest news of the alliance. Fu then handed the jade plaques to his ally and said that they would also be useful in the future. After that, the fat man said goodbye to his friend and said that they would see each other very soon. But no sooner had Xu Fan turned around than he suddenly felt that there was someone behind him. Suddenly, a female voice asked the guy if he had just received guests.
Pet the cat.